Welcome, Liban. We really appreciate your leadership and taking the time to do this interview today.
Thanks so much, Blessed. It's great to be here with you.
As always, we like to start off by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on, as well as our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We'd like to acknowledge our elders and all community stewards whose shoulders that we continue to stand on as we build and share, and we learn together for a collective liberation. So please go ahead and introduce yourself and let our listeners know who you are and what the remarkable work that you do.
Blessed, once again, it's great to be here with you. Shout out to Setsi and the incredible work that the organization does for people of African descent, not only here in Canada, but globally. You folks are really, really, really moving the needle on so many important things. And I just want to start off by saying I'm a big fan and I'm really, really excited to be here. Who is Liban is the question, I think. And, I struggle with this question because I try to answer it as authentically as I can, but I can't help but start with what I do because it'll give you a sense of who I am. So I'm the managing partner of Reimagine Labs, and Reimagine Labs is a data analytics firm that I founded about 2 years ago, and our entire mission and vision is to ensure that nonprofit organizations in the public and in the social sector have access to the best information and data that they can to ensure that they're delivering the right programs at the right time and in the right way. The reason why that's really important to me is I often, growing up, relied on those kind of programs to help me, whether it was a homework club that I had access to help me complete my grade 10 English homework, whether it was the basketball program where I got to learn like important skills like teamwork and make some of my lifelong friends, or whether it was the food program where I was able to get a snack on days that, maybe we didn't have everything we needed. And so I recognize how important those were to shaping me. And I want to ensure that others who come after me and tomorrow have those exact same opportunities. And so I know that it's not easy figuring out what people need and how to deliver it in the right way. And I'm very mindful that if we don't understand and we don't know how to deliver them, the outcomes can sometimes be not only less than optimal, they can actually be harmful. And I can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like, in terms of what I mean by harmful. But that's a little bit about me. I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in housing, I've worked in education. I've had this really long, winding road. And at each stage of those experiences, it's always come back to one thing, and that is improving outcomes for Black communities and removing barriers to our opportunities. So that's Liban. No matter where I go, I carry our community with me. And no matter what I do, my goal is to ensure that we remove barriers so that no one is left behind.
I love that. And I think that, those winding roads is what really prepares us, to be, the leaders that, as you say, are moving the needle forward for the community. So really appreciate that introduction. Definitely necessary. I just realized, I really should have called you Dr. Liban. Congratulations is in order. It's always great to hear that, members of our community are being acknowledged for their efforts and their consistency. So once again, congratulations.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. I have to admit, it was a bit of a shock and surprise when that opportunity came up. I don't know how often it is that someone under 40 gets conferred an honorary degree, and I remember asking them, like, "Are you sure? I have a lot of. Are you sure? Like, you guys want to do this?" And I'm shout out to Carleton. They felt that it was a worthwhile recognition, and my mother certainly agrees.
Exactly. We couldn't agree with them more. So don't doubt it next time. It's like the IKEA commercial. Just start the car. Just start the car. We love it. So we salute you and definitely want to big up that accomplishment. That's huge. So We definitely celebrating you. So can you start off by articulating your personal mission and vision?
Yeah, funny, I actually spoke about that for the first time, and I think the clearest way that I've ever gotten a chance to at the commencement speech, when I was receiving the doctorate. My core vision in my life is to ensure that no one is left behind, and I'd love to explain what that means to me through a story. Um, my One of my first jobs was a summer camp counselor, and I was, I think, 13 or 14 years old, and I was overseeing the 5 and 6 year olds group. And one day we're about to go off to swimming, and two of my kids um, are on the side. And I go to them, I go, well, why are you not in line? And they said, one of them said they didn't bring the $5, which is the admission fee, and the other one didn't bring their swim trunks. And I thought to myself, oh man, that sucks. It's a really hot day. These kids should come swimming with us. So I run over to one of the senior counselors and I go, hey, can I still take these kids? One of them doesn't have their swim trunks, and the other one doesn't have the $5. And without hesitation, they took out $5 and gave it to me. And then they took out another $20 and gave it to me for the swim trunks. So I went and I filled out the form and I gave the $5 to our administrator. And then I took the other $20, put in my pocket with the idea that I would, as we're walking, I would stop at one of the stores and buy swim trunks. So I have a solution, I have a plan, I'm about to head out. And right as I'm about to exit the door, one of the senior managers runs out and goes, hey, stop. Those two kids can't go with you. They didn't pay and they don't have their swim trunks. And I was like,
Wow.
no, we resolved it. Don't worry about it. And she said, no, you didn't resolve it, because we can't set a precedent where staff are paying for young people, because it's not something we can guarantee we can do every single time. And I'm astonished at that point. I'm 13, 14. I don't understand policy. All I know is there's a solution to this problem that doesn't leave a child behind. And you're letting policy get in the way of that. So I don't have any power. Those two kids get removed, and I get told to move along. And right before we leave, I can hear a child ask, why am I being left behind? And in my mind, as I walk the rest of the way to the swimming pool, all I can answer is, because you're poor. Because you're poor. Because your mother and father had to spend that $20 on milk, or that $5 for bus fare to get to work. That's why you weren't able to come with us. But how is that child's fault, right? And how could we, as an organization, be okay with leaving those children behind? And in that day, I didn't realize how much that experience would shape me, Blessed. I'm not going to lie to you and say to you, it was on that day that I said to myself, I'll make sure no one is ever left behind. But it became a recurring experience for me, seeing our people consistently left behind. Today was swimming. Later, it would become education. It would become Black women in the employment sector. It would become Black seniors out of housing. It would become Black and Caribbean and African people looking to escape climate change, but not being able to immigrate to safe nations. We're always being left behind. And it caused me to think, what is my role to ensure that that doesn't happen? Or it doesn't happen as consistently. It doesn't happen as widely. And it doesn't happen without being addressed. And so that's my mission in my life, right? I want to ensure that no one is left behind. But I want to especially ensure that our people, Black, African, Canadian, Caribbean communities, are never left behind, and that we're always in a position to self-determine our futures. We're able to self-determine our solutions. And more important than that, we have the resources to do so. That's my mission.
I love that. I wish everyone had a story that could help to articulate their vision and mission, because we can see the connection. We can see how, like you said, it planted the seed, it sparked something in you. It wasn't the pivotal moment, but it definitely was the beginning, that everything else you know what I mean, related back to like how you felt in that moment, and you could see how they could feel. So I really love how you were able to articulate that and paint that picture. So how important do you feel that social innovation is to the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, at Reimagine Labs, um, which is where I currently work as a managing partner, we're a data analytics firm. Our entire mission is to ensure that we change the way the social and public sector addresses complex challenges. You know, in Canada, we have just within the philanthropic sector about $9 billion a year going towards addressing uh, areas like alleviation of poverty, improvement of health, and so forth. And organizations receive that money every single year. And yet, on most accounts, the experiences of people like you and I, Indigenous communities, women, people with disabilities, the experience around poverty has actually only gone downward. For example, um, when we think about the recovery of Black women in the employment space following COVID, we realize that Black women have had an incredibly difficult time. When we think about home ownership, when we think about wealth and income. And so I think to myself, how are we spending $9 billion a year, yet the desperate and um, disproportionate experiences continue? And a part of me says it's probably because we're not delivering the right programs at the right time and in the right way. And I thought about why that happens. And one of the reasons is actually tied to another story, my own story at one point. I once spent $250,000 creating the world's best homework club, only for it to fail. And when I looked back on why it failed, I realized that I was using intuition and imitation. I was trying to imitate what I saw others do, not realizing the shortcomings of those programs. And I used my own intuition, thinking, well, what should be done? What I needed to actually have was information. I should have been looking at evidence, best practice, and data. But I was in my early to mid 20s. I had very little experience around program design, evaluation, and implementation science. And that story, or that reality, the context, I should say, is not uncommon to the way many nonprofit organizations serving our communities look and feel. And so I said to myself, what would it look like if I could help organizations get the right information, the right data, and the right evidence at the moment they need it to design the programs that our communities actually require? And so that's what Reimagine Labs does today. We're actually working on a really cool project where we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to democratize access to evidence towards the design of better programs. Right now, if you want to design a good program, you're relying again on imitation and intuition, or you're relying on really expensive consultants like KPMG or Deloitte or an EY to come in. And in both of those cases, there are constraints to how that actually works out for Black folks. One of them is you probably can't afford EY or the professional consultants, or B, the staff that you have are already wearing so many hats that it's not a sustainable model to ask them to design, deliver, and then evaluate all at the same time. And so Reimagine Labs, we come in and will help you get access to the right information you need, integrate those learnings into your programs, and as we redesign your new solution, and then we help you figure out how to implement it in the way that serves your community best. So that's, to me, how we're using social innovation, how we're using emerging technologies to help solve the information gap that we've seen continue to imperil the nonprofit sector. And so we're using social innovation to make it easier to do good now.
Absolutely. I think it's so true. Not just that you were in your mid-20s, but people double and triple your age and making the same mistake when it comes to programming. So it's such an honest reflection to say that, we have to look at exactly what it is that people need. And it's great that you're, using innovation and AI to make that adjustment. So I think it's pivotal, and a lot of people need to follow suit. What inspires you most about your current work right now?
So every day I get to work with folks trying to address the most complex challenges. You know, I talked earlier about the context and the conditions that are facing our community, but you can't tell Black people nothing. Like, you're not going to tell us we're down. You know what I mean? We are resilient. We are hopeful. And more important than that, we are purposeful. Like, we are solving the problems we experience. So, what drives and motivates me is knowing that we're here and we're going to figure things out and we want things to be better. But we're not just busy dreaming, right? We're not busy imagining. We're actually busy doing. And so I love the fact that every day I get to see brilliant Black sisters and brothers working tirelessly for the betterment of our community. And I get to play a small part and working alongside them. And that's something worth getting up for.
Absolutely. So what challenges or barriers do you face in your work, and how are you and your team overcoming them?
One of the realities that I think that we're already encountering is the speed at which technological advances are changing our economic and global realities. For example, there are studies that have come out that suggest a significant portion of our labor force will likely experience permanent and structural unemployment as a result of, again, automation and technological advances. One thing that I say is a barrier or structure is how well are we prepared for that reality, particularly for communities that have historically found it difficult to not only latch on but maintain employment within the labor markets. Uh, you know, if we're not prepared for that, what we're going to continue to see is um, not only folks not having a job, it's not then having the ability to consume. Right? We're talking about being able to get food and housing and shelter. It's the ability to realize one's purpose and pursue their goals. And so I think a lot about that. It keeps me up, to be honest. This idea of a world where structural unemployment uh, is a constant. Um, I also struggle with the fact that I don't find um, enough of an alarm on this issue, right? Not only within our community, but within policymakers. I don't find enough alarm that says, "Hey, there are already communities that are disadvantaged that are only going to be further disadvantaged. We're already the canary in the coal mines in these instances." And I think there's enough of seismic activity to tell us we should be acting quickly, and I don't think we're doing it. So that's a bit of a challenge that I'm seeing from a community standpoint. I think it's unfair to maybe categorize it as a barrier in our community. I don't see barriers as much as I see a desire to act, but sometimes not having the resources to do so. And that's another barrier. It's difficult to build things without the right tools. And I think we're a community of ingenuity. I think we're a community of brilliance, passion, as I said earlier. But one barrier that I think we experience as we think about answering the question of structural unemployment or any other element is making sure that our communities are not without the resources to withstand these challenges or to construct solutions to these challenges. Uh, so yeah, that's a really good question, and I hope I've offered some insight.
Absolutely. I think you dropped a lot of big facts there. So it's necessary to take light of what the issues are. And I think that a lot of us, share in the same sentiment. So I'm definitely glad that you and your team are attacking them. Would you say that you have a key set of priorities right now in your work that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really focus on at work every day is making sure that we're utilizing emerging technology, but that we're addressing the bias within emerging technology as well. Data is a really important um, source or area of innovation, but data is not some objective artifact, right? It has to be analyzed, it has to be interpreted, then it has to be applied. And the way that information is used currently can be very harmful to Black communities. And so I think we need to have more uh, folks scrutinizing the information that's being used. We need more folks in the data science and the data analytics space. We need more folks talking about the ethics of utilization of technologies like generative artificial intelligence. Um, so I think a lot about how to create greater awareness in this area, and there are folks who are doing this um, far better than I am. But this is something that I think a lot about. Um, Another area of policy that I think really matters, and this is maybe unaligned, is maybe it's tangential. Is I think a lot about seniors housing. You know, my I have family members who've worked 30, 40 years here in this country and have pensions. And you know, they imagined a world where a pension of $3,500 would be enough. And they now live at a time where they can barely afford a rent, two-bedroom apartment to rent, or their medicine, or their travel to the doctor's office. The cost of living here is an area that I think is um, disproportionately, again, once again, affecting people of color. And I think a lot about how we could address the housing crisis specifically for seniors, a population that is often forgotten. You know, once seniors are no longer working and they're not contributing to the tax base, we seem to disregard them or discard them actually, and that's not from our culture. That's not from our ancestry. We don't do that, nor we should we. So I think a lot about how we can improve seniors' care, um, uh, ensure that they have dignified places and lives, dignified places to live, and dignified lives to lead in their retirement. That's another area that I think a lot about. And so those are the two policy areas that I think I would highlight as keeping me up at night and getting me going in the morning.
Yeah, that's huge. And now earlier you mentioned how you touched on how things can be harmful, and you touched a little bit on it now, how the data can be harmful. Did you want to explain a little bit more about how the data can be used in more harmful ways for our community right now?
Let me let me give you an example. Think about a song that you really, 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 really love, right? When you hear it, when you're happy, it means one thing. And when you're angry, it means a complete other. In other words, your lens that you're listening to that song, or the mood that you're listening to that song in, changes its inflection, right? The experience. Data is no different. If you have a particular lens and a view of life, and you now look at a report on gun violence, you might quickly say to yourself, this report's telling me that more policing is needed. If you have a different experience and different, you might say more mental health supports is needed to address gun violence. In other words, the utilization of data has to be accompanied by uh, sifting that data from multiple different perspectives. And I believe right now what we find is, you know, we have artificial intelligence that has been designed primarily by one strata of society being used to design solutions for another strata of society. And that's the harmful part, because it means that the people experiencing the problem aren't creating the solution, but the solution is now being created by the AI, who we say is objective, but the AI has been programmed by individuals who are not of them. So if we're going to talk about for us bias, we have to be very careful to ensure that the artificial intelligence models, like, for example, even ChatGPT, are being informed by the experiences of all. Otherwise, we're going to find solutions, thoughts, you know, inferences that are being made based not on some completely automated system, but one that has been programmed with a worldview. And so that's what I mean by harm.
Absolutely. And I think there's a real vivid example of exactly what you're speaking to in terms of the self-driving cars. They talked about, engineers working on this, typically, white males. And so when they're programming the car to identify a human being and when you should stop, they fill it with images, and those images are more white people. And so the car doesn't even know enough to acknowledge people of color, right? And so that's like a prime example of how lack of representation has such an impact on innovation. So I'm glad you really touched on that. If we shift gears now, can you illustrate what is your ultimate goal? What does success look like to you and your colleagues?
So there are about 1 million nonprofits, organizations within North America that we believe um, could use better evidence integration and learning integration into their services. And of those 1 million nonprofits and charities across North America, they're probably serving somewhere to the tune of 100 to about 120 million people. And so we believe that we will be able to ensure, support, or guide the development of better programs to respond to the needs of that population that I spoke about. To give you like one simple example, I grew up in a neighborhood called Regent Park in Toronto, and it was a neighborhood known for a significant amount of gun violence. In many cases, the mothers of the victims of gun violence would come together and think to themselves, what could we do to resolve the issue of gun violence? And rightfully so, you know. And I know this is going to sound, um, I hope it doesn't sound like a negative comment, but the question I often used to ask is, are well-intentioned mothers enough to solve gun violence, right? In other words, do they have the right information about the best practices to reducing gun violence? Is it the mothers group that is able to address the housing on the lack of housing, which is a contributor to gun violence, the food insecurity problem that is a contributor to gun violence, the poor integration and settlement experiences of immigrants that's a contributor to gun violence, the lack of employment, the lack, you know, is that what we should be thinking about as sorry, eh, is that group that would the group of mothers, would they have the data information needed to know what actually works, and do they have the appropriate resources to do so? So in the future, what I'd love to be able to do through Reimagine Labs is when a group of any community comes together and they have a problem, they would be able to go onto one of the tools that we're working on and describe the problem, describe the outcome that they want, and then as an output, it would be able to share every single best practice to be able to deliver that solution. Further to that, it's going to be able to tell them, here's your work plan, here's a logic model, here are the outcomes you need to achieve, and here's your implementation plan. If we can do that, we're going to be able to accelerate the development of solutions by ourselves, for ourselves, to the problems that we're so good at identifying, and in some cases could use a little bit of more help to design the solutions to those problems.
Thank you for that. I think very well said. I'm glad that you were able to share both your mission, vision, and the ultimate solution for the community. Do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our community?
I think a lot about the discussions around what we don't have, and I'd love to remind us of what we do have. Over the last 2.5, 3 years, I've had the chance to travel Canada, and I've gotten the chance to meet hundreds, and I mean it, hundreds of Black-led serving organizations that are taking charge of our futures, right? Helping us address everything from food insecurity to housing to healthcare to so much more. And we need to be able to give these organizations not only the resources, but we need to be able to give them the time to figure it out. I think about the YMCA being developed nearly 136 years ago, and no one would ever accuse the YMCA of being perfect. Many of our organizations are not older than 10, maybe 15 years old. Many are under 5. And I often find that we don't have the sustained support to allow them to learn, grow, and then stabilize. So I would say find an organization in your community and volunteer. Offer your expertise. You know, we have so many brilliant Black folks in these communities all around the country. And what other communities have done is that they volunteered at these organizations. If you think this organization has a poor governance structure, volunteer on its board. If you think this organization has a poor ability to manage its finances, let's get some Black accountants to offer some guidance. If you think that we could do a better job on, talent, if you have a good background in HR, come in and help, right? I think we would be best served to preserve what we have and to grow it than to identify what isn't working and then seek to get rid of it. I want to be clear, if it is harming our community, it should be gotten rid of. If something isn't working and we shouldn't be thinking about just keeping it alive to keep alive. But I think there's so many great organizations that are doing work and they often hit a wall because the financial resources they have to acquire the talent that they need isn't always there. But we could supplement that by volunteering, by contributing. And if we were to do that, I promise you, the benefits of that organization in the future will come back around to you, to your family, to your community.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, very well said. It's necessary to take part. I think volunteerism can go so far. And I think sometimes people sleep on that or don't see how, valuable or powerful it is. So I'm glad that you were willing to highlight that. Again, we really appreciate your time and the remarkable work that you're doing, Dr. Liban. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview with us today. Keep up the remarkable work for sure.
Blessed, may I add one small correction? It's
Absolutely.
not volunteering that I'm calling for.
Mm,
It's sweat equity. Consider these organizations in things that deserve our sweat and our equity. We should be investing in them because the dividends that they pay out later are benefits to our community, right? So, Black folks have always been volunteering. We're always doing unpaid labor. Let's not get it twisted, particularly Black women. But I think we need to just reframe and recognize that we're investing in these organizations with the hope that they pay the dividends that are beneficial to advancing our communities. So volunteering is one thing, but really, real intentional and focused sweat equity is, I think, what I'd like to call for. But thank you so much. It was incredible. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Blessed, for not being too hard. I was worried. I was like, am I prepared for the questions? But you've been one of the best interviewers I've ever had. So shout out
oh,
to you.
wow. I'm flattered. No, you did amazing. I think that each answer definitely provoked a lot of thought in others. Our viewers and listeners are going to really appreciate that. And again, we really do applaud the work that you do and hope to have you back in the future, to touch on more pressing issues and as well. We like to close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on and our ancestors, those who toiled without compassion or compensation, as well as those, our elders and community stewards whose shoulders we continue to stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So again, thank you so much to you and to our viewers and listeners. We thank you for tuning in.